What is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake, Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully everyone's doing well out there. Today we're talking about quarterbacks that we're going to start and sit here in Week 3 Fantasy Football. Full disclosure as we head into this video. There's a lot of quarterbacks that are in good situations to score some fantasy points this week, and there's some big-name studs that I'm pretty worried about. We're going to be covering them in all the matchups here in just 1 second. Just a quick reminder, if you haven't joined us over on Prize Picks, now is the time to do so. We got some good props we're going to be bringing up in this video as well. If you haven't created that account there at prizepicks.com or download the app, create the new account, make a $10 deposit. They're going to match your deposit all the way up to $100 if you so choose to deposit that much, and then you can have some fun with us, make some extra money on the side, having a great time with Prize Picks, so make sure you join us there. But now let's dive in to the matchups this week, kicking it off Thursday Night Football. The Pittsburgh Steelers and the Cleveland Browns. Now, on paper, you're like, yes, I like this type of matchup on a Thursday night. And then you realize that you're stuck watching Mitchy Biscuits, Mitchell Trubisky against Jacoby Brissett, and all of a sudden, you're just not as excited anymore. Not really the marquee matchup that you're looking for. We'll start off with Mitch Trubisky. I mean, he's currently quarterback 22 overall, has yet to throw for over 200 yards in a game, and has no rushing upside. Not a lot to be excited for there in the production category when it comes to volume. They're still throwing the ball quite a bit, averaging just about 35.5 pass attempts per game. Now they're going up against the Cleveland Browns, who allow just over 22 fantasy points per game, which is 9th most in the NFL to opposing quarterbacks. Not a bad matchup, no major injuries to worry about right now for the Pittsburgh Steelers, but there's just no X factor for me here. It's minimal touchdown opportunities in an offense that just doesn't have big plays anymore like we're used to seeing in the past. It's going to lead to an inconsistent ceiling, and honestly, somebody that I just can't trust in fantasy football. For Jacoby Brissett, he's currently quarterback 21, one spot ahead of Mitch, which is absolutely crazy. And he wasn't really horrible in week 2, right? The offense is just too run heavy for him to put up high numbers in fantasy football. The running backs are going to steal the touchdowns more times than not. Now, they're barely averaging 30 pass attempts per game because you know they're heavy on the run. Pittsburgh allows only 18 fantasy points per game, which is a middle-of-the-pack defense when it comes to quarterback scoring. No major injuries here as well. There's just no touchdown upside whatsoever. Sure, there's going to be games where he'll go out there and he'll throw for 2 touchdowns. There's going to be a lot of games where he goes out there and doesn't throw for any, and I can't take that risk in week 3 of fantasy football. But now we head to Sunday football. We have the New Orleans Saints, Carolina Panthers, and for Jameis Winston, he's currently quarterback 15 right now in fantasy football. Had 3 interceptions last week, but that was against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's yet to throw for over 300 yards in a game as well. But what's really kind of somewhat concerning, he threw the ball 40 times in week 2. I don't know if I like that number for Jameis Winston. When he is asked to force the ball more throughout the game, that's when we start to see some of these turnovers happen. Now, like I said, I'm giving a lot of credit to the Tampa Bay defense here, but it's just one of those things where I would love it if we see Jameis Winston hovering more along that line of 32 to 34 pass attempts per game. Maybe the overall totals are a little bit lower, but he's a lot more efficient. He's taking care of the football. Right now, they're averaging 37 pass attempts per game on the year. Carolina's doing pretty good against opposing quarterbacks. They're allowing only 12 fantasy points per game, which is 4th fewest in the NFL. But they've had 2 matchups against Daniel Jones and Jacoby Brissett. So it's not like they're out there facing all-world quarterbacks just yet. Kind of unsure whether or not Alvin Kamara plays this week. That's one other piece to this offense that could help Jameis Winston. But the X factor for me is this. I'm banking on the fact that the Panthers defense just hasn't been tested yet. They haven't faced an offense like the New Orleans Saints just yet, and Jameis Winston goes out and has a bounce back game. Is he an automatic smash start? No, he's not, but he's somebody who I will consider, especially in 2 quarterback leagues. For Baker Mayfield, he's currently tied with Jameis Winston right now, the exact same amount of points. At quarterback 15, only has 2 passing touchdowns now, though, in 2 games, and Baker's just not being asked to do too much, right? He's only averaging 28 pass attempts per game, which is 29th in the NFL, going up against the New Orleans Saints, who allowed just over 14 fantasy points per game. No major injuries here for the Carolina Panthers, but there's just not enough downfield boost, I guess we could say, to really give Baker Mayfield that higher ceiling. Sure, the big play was there in week 1, a lot of dink and dunk, not a whole lot deep down the field to really get Baker up into that category of, 275, 300, multiple touchdowns. Just not what we're seeing yet from Baker Mayfield. Could it happen later on in the season? I think it honestly could, but it's not yet, and he's going to remain a sit. How about Houston and Chicago? Davis Mills, Justin Fields. For Davis Mills, he's currently sitting at quarterback 26. Another guy, only 2 touchdowns combined in his first 2 games, but hasn't thrown any interceptions yet, so that is a good thing. He's averaging right around 28 pass attempts per game. Going up against the Chicago Bears, though, they only allow 13.7 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, which is 8th fewest in the NFL. Number slightly skewed because of that Week 1 hurricane that they played in. No major injuries here for Houston. I don't want to say a difficult matchup, but I got to give the Bears a little bit of respect here, and the lack of touchdowns in the Houston offense. I can't trust Dave. I don't think you can trust Dave. Do we need to sit here and continue to talk about Davis Mills as a fantasy quarterback here this week? I don't think we need to. I'm not taking anything away from Davis Mills. I think he's a solid quarterback, but not a fantasy quarterback here for me. For Justin Fields, I mean, we just can't, right? I think we can all agree that we just can't trust Justin Fields right now in the Chicago Bears offense, or lack thereof, I guess we could say, outside of David Montgomery. Maybe Justin Fields, currently quarterback 21, only completed 15 passes in 2 games. That ain't going to cut it for fantasy football. Heck, right now, the rushing upside isn't even there for Justin Fields. He's only averaging 14.5 pass attempts per game, which is last in the NFL. Houston, they're a little bit underrated on defense. Give the Houston Texans secondary some love. They're only allowing 14.2 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. They are definitely underrated in my opinion. No major injuries for Chicago, but the lack of rushing upside is very worrisome. The lack of passing volume, also worrisome. The lack of touchdown. I could keep on going here, but Justin Fields just not a fantasy option for us just yet. How about we go to Kansas City and Indianapolis for Patrick Mahomes? Finally, we're going to talk about a quarterback that's a pretty easy start for you here in fantasy football. Somebody that finally scores some damn points around here. He's quarterback 6 overall, has 7 touchdowns, no interceptions on the season, and he's spreading the ball around to multiple receivers, which honestly is working out just fine for Patrick Mahomes. He's averaging 37.5 pass attempts per game, which is 11th most in the NFL. The Colts allow over 17 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. Justin Watson and Mecole Hardman are both questionable, but there's still plenty of options to go around in Kansas City. Maybe we see some more Juju this week. Would love to see some more Juju, but we also know that each and every game that Patrick Mahomes plays, he has that potential to go out there and throw 5 touchdowns. Does this Colts defense finally show up? Does it even matter? Of course, we're still starting Patrick Mahomes regardless. For Matt Ryan, it's funny how people want to go in the comment section or on social media and they want to just totally rag on Matt Ryan after his week 2 performance and talk about how he's washed and we told y'all he sucked. Totally leave out the fact that he didn't have his best receiver in Michael Pittman. Didn't have Alec Pierce either, which I know a lot of people love Alec Pierce. That stuff matters in fantasy football. Just throwing that out there. It matters when you don't have your top weapons. Yeah, was it a bad game? For sure, but everybody's going to have bad games. In a better matchup like this, I don't hate Matt Ryan. They're still throwing the ball a lot. 40 pass attempts per game on average is 7th most in the NFL. Going up against the Kansas City Chiefs, who allow over 23 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, which is 7th most. He needs Michael Pittman back, though. We need Michael Pittman in the lineup. For right now, I have Matt Ryan as a start. If for some reason we do not have Michael Pittman, he will not be a start. I need Pittman in that lineup to be the start. We know Kansas City is going to go out there and score points, and the opposing teams, in this case, the Colts, are going to have to keep their foot on the pedal and continue to throw, but this is so dependent on the health concerns of this team. We need Michael Pittman, we need Alec Pierce to be active to really make Matt Ryan still that low-end start. How about Buffalo and Miami? That's going to be my Manscaped matchup of the week. Make sure after this video is over, you head over to manscaped.com and get yourself something for the travel bag, for the bathroom, fellas. You don't want to miss out on this opportunity. It's not just ball trimmers. They have everything from the tip of your head to the end of your toes to make sure you are covered and taken care of all year long. Use code HEADLINERS at checkout for 20% off and free shipping, but we'll kick it off with Josh Allen. I just don't know what we're going to do with this Josh Allen guy. Do you think he's startable? Hell yeah, he's startable. He's currently quarterback 2 overall, has 8 touchdowns in just the first 2 games, and is averaging over 30 fantasy points per game. And he's not having to throw the ball 50 times a game either, which is actually good because it's going to keep him fresh and healthy all year long, averaging only 35.5 pass attempts per game, 17th in the NFL. Now, Miami scoring as many points as they do really leads to their opponents to have to really keep their foot on the pedal as well and continue to score, because Miami allows 26.1 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. That's 4th most in the NFL. This is lining up to be a good week for Josh Allen. No major injury concerns. He's putting up huge numbers, and he's not really having to run to do it. What happens when that rushing upside catches up with everything else? Josh Allen could be out here putting up 50 burgers on people. How about for Tua? Love Tua. Have loved Tua for years. It's documented on video. Love to see this guy finding some success. And now he gets the Buffalo Bills defense, which is not ideal by any means. He's currently quarterback 5 overall, averaging over 25 fantasy points per game. Also has 7 touchdowns in just 2 games and has tons of weapons in the offense that he is including each and every game. Now, Miami is just chucking the ball this year. A lot of people maybe thought it would be a little bit more dink and dunk when they went out and they got Raheem Mostert and Chase Edmonds. Nah. They're going deep down the field, averaging 41 pass attempts per game, which is 5th most in the NFL. Buffalo, though, is by far the toughest matchup they have faced all year. They only allow 6.8 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. That is not good. That is by far the best in the NFL. No major injury concerns here, though, but it's the ability to have big-time playmakers that can take short routes and turn them into huge gains due to their ability to gain yards after the catch is going to help Tua all year long. No doubt about that. But in a matchup going up against Buffalo, this is a super high risk. I love the Miami offense. I believe in Tua. But this is one of those situations where at the end of the week, if he scores 8 fantasy points, am I going to be surprised? No, the defense in Buffalo is that good. Like I said, a super high risk start, going to be a little bit lower in my rankings as well. But on paper, production-wise, Tua, he's putting in some work this year. How about Detroit and Minnesota? Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins. Jared Goff is currently quarterback 9 in fantasy football, and he's all of a sudden fantasy relevant for a lot of people. 6 touchdowns in 2 games. He's got weapons to utilize, a solid offensive line, throwing the ball over 35 times a game, going up against the Minnesota Vikings, who allow over 20 fantasy points per game, which is 11th most in the NFL. A little concern here on the offensive line, though. We have Frank Ragnow, we have Jonah Jackson, both questionable. We need them in the lineup to really help Goff have his protection that he needs, but the X factor is Amon-Ra St. Brown. This dude has the ability to take over a game. But what we have to be careful for is that we don't just force feed and lock on to Amon-Ra. We still have TJ Hawkinson. We still have DJ Chark. DeAndre Swift doing his thing. But we have other options in this offense that can really help spread the defense out. If we can start to find some of these other guys throughout the field, it's only going to help Jared Goff in the long run. If we don't just zone in on Amon-Ra, eventually defenses are just going to try to take him away. If we can include everybody every week, Jared Goff could be a solid fantasy quarterback for the next few weeks. I mean, this is definitely a team that's putting up some big numbers for sure for Kirk Cousins. Cousins currently sitting at quarterback 18 after a rough week 2 against the Philadelphia Eagles. I really expect more of this offense to be used other than just Justin Jefferson going forward. Kind of like we just talked about with Amon-Ra, I feel like the Vikings have just locked on and zoned in on Justin Jefferson, and they're forgetting about a lot of the other playmakers on this team. Adam Thielen was an afterthought till the 4th quarter was basically half over in week 2. Dalvin Cook not seeing his normal volume. It's like Justin Jefferson or bust, and Minnesota needs to fix that because they're still throwing the ball quite a bit, 39 times a game, which is 8th most in the NFL. Going up against the Detroit Lions, who allow the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks at 26 fantasy points per game. No major injuries here that we're worried about, but we need to see more Thielen. We need to see more Cook. We need to see more Irv Smith. I did like to see Irv Smith get involved a little bit last week. Need that to continue. We need this offense to just be spread around a little bit more, and that's when we're going to start to see the bigger numbers come here for Kirk Cousins. How about Baltimore and New England? You got Lamar Jackson, and he's currently the quarterback 1 overall, thanks to the rushing upside here for Lamar Jackson. He's got 7 total touchdowns and 136 total yards rushing in the first 2 games of the season, not having to throw the ball a ton, averaging only 29.5 pass attempts per game. Tough matchup for him here, though, this week, going up against the New England Patriots. They only allow 13.6 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. For injuries, what about J.K. Dobbins? Does he return this week? That would eat into the rushing upside slightly. What about Ronnie Stanley on the offensive line? Would love to have him back. Devin Duvernay, one of his big play wide receivers in concussion protocol, questionable to play. Just some pieces that we're watching here in week 3, but the X factor is going to be the rushing upside that we saw in week 2. He can win you matchups. He can win you ball games on 1 or 2 rushing attempts a game. The guy is electric, and until we see J.K. Dobbins back at 100% full health, Lamar Jackson is an obvious smash must start every single week. His opponent, Mac Jones, not so much. He's currently sitting at quarterback 25, averaging under 12 fantasy points per game, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions in the first 2 games of the season. Just a low ceiling offense for the quarterbacks nowadays. They only throw the ball right around 33 times a game, 20th in the NFL. The Ravens do allow over 28 fantasy points per game, so it's not a bad matchup. That's the most in the NFL, actually. There's no major injuries here, but the running backs are just stealing too many of the touchdowns. Mac Jones himself, not getting that high touchdown upside, and if I'm only getting 1 touchdown a week from my quarterback more times than not, I'm going to be disappointed, so Mac Jones going to remain a sit for Cincinnati and the New York Jets. Jets, Jets. Joe Burrow, he's currently quarterback 11 despite having a down week 2 and everybody basically giving up on Joe Burrow already. But don't forget, he didn't really even have a preseason. He had that appendectomy procedure, which is still leading to maybe a little bit of off-season rust here. I expect Joe Burrow to get it going. They still throw the ball a butt ton in Cincinnati, over 44 pass attempts per game. The Giants allow only 16.3 fantasy points per game, but there's no major injuries to worry about here. And having T. Higgins back in practice for a full week in a decent matchup, I'm looking for the bounce back this week for Joe Burrow. For Joe Flacco, don't look now, but Joe Flacco has back-to-back 300-yard games, 5 touchdowns to only 1 interception, and his quarterback 10 overall in fantasy football. What the hell is going on? Joe Flacco is kind of a thing right now. I mean, they're throwing the ball a lot. Dude, they're averaging 52 pass attempts per game. This is like vintage Joe Flacco. This is Baltimore Ravens Joe Flacco right here. Now they're going up against Cincinnati, though, and their defense is pretty solid against opposing quarterbacks, allowing only 13.1 fantasy points per game, which is 6th fewest. But Joe Flacco has minimal injuries to worry about, and we know Cincinnati's going to put up some points. They're going to score in this game, which means Joe Flacco is going to be playing from behind, throwing the ball a lot. He's got Garrett Wilson dialed up. We haven't really seen much of Elijah Moore yet. Corey Davis is getting some big plays. Tyler Conklin involved. Then we got Michael Carter and Breece Hall. Plenty of options for Joe Flacco, but it's still the Jets, right? I don't want to get too overly excited because whenever you get, some positivity about the Jets, sometimes they disappoint you. But for right now, the way that Joe Flacco is playing with the weapons that he has in this matchup, I actually have him as a start. Which will take us over to Tennessee for the Raiders and the Titans, and Derek Carr, who's currently quarterback 12 overall right now in fantasy football in a pass-first offense. I think we can all kind of see that. He just needs to limit the damn interceptions, take care of the football. Derek Carr, they're throwing the ball right around 38 times per game, 10th most in the NFL, and now a matchup going up against Tennessee, who allows over 23 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. When it comes to injuries, though, does he have Hunter Renfrow back? 2 huge mistakes late in that game last week for Renfrow, and then suffered a concussion. Do we see him in the lineup this week? Now, a lot of you may be saying, doesn't matter, dude. Renfrow ain't doing a whole lot this year. It really does, because he's another guy that the defenses have to account for, which is still allowing the guys like Darren Waller and Devontae Adams to have that one-on-one coverage every once in a while. We need Hunter Renfrow in the lineup. The X factor, though, the Raiders are just not committed to running the football. The defense knows that more times than not, they're going to be throwing the ball down the field. He's not drawing the defense in with a solid running game and giving his guys on the outside, Adams and Waller and Renfrow, an opportunity to see more one-on-one coverage. They need to get that defense creeping in so they can beat more defenses deep down the field, if that makes sense. I'm really looking for a lot of Darren Waller, if I'm being honest here this week, going up against the Tennessee Titans. Devontae Adams had a down week 2 as well. But this team needs to run the ball successfully to open up the passing game. That's one of their biggest issues here as of right now. Ryan Tannehill had a crazy tough week 2. It dropped Ryan Tannehill all the way down to quarterback 27. So that's a lot of credit to the Buffalo defense, though. Tanny is still solid. The Buffalo defense is just that good. This is not ever going to be one of those high-powered passing attacks. This offense is still going to run through Derrick Henry, and it needs to. They're only throwing the ball 28.5 times per game, which is 28th in the NFL. But this is a great bounce-back opportunity for Ryan Tannehill going up against the Las Vegas Raiders, who allow 24.1 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, which is 6th most in the NFL. One of the biggest concerns here, though, is the potential loss of offensive lineman Taylor Lewan. That is a big loss on that offensive line. They need him healthy to give not only Ryan Tannehill protection, but the ability to open up more running lanes for Derrick Henry. The X factor, this is a matchup that Derrick Henry can dominate. And when we see Derrick Henry dominate on the ground, it really opens up Ryan Tannehill for those bigger plays down the field to Treylon Burks, Robert Woods, maybe even a little Austin Hooper, but it all runs through Derrick Henry. When we see Derrick Henry struggle, we see Ryan Tannehill struggle. This is a game that Henry should play pretty well in, and that's why I'm expecting the bounce back once again from Ryan Tannehill. How about Philly and Washington? Jalen Hurts, quarterback 3 overall right now, and the rushing upside is really putting him over the top. 147 yards rushing and 3 rushing touchdowns in just 2 games. That is huge for fantasy football, but they're only asking him to throw the ball right around 32 times a game, 21st in the NFL, actually maybe a little bit higher than I had expected coming into the season. Now a matchup going up against the Washington Commandos. They allow right around 20 fantasy points per game, 12th most in the NFL, but really no injuries of concern for Philadelphia. And just like we've said for a long time, everything that Jalen Hurts does in the passing game is like a bonus. It's the cherry on top because we're here for the rushing upside. Everything he gets through the air, which has been pretty good here as of late, is just a huge bonus, and he's helping a lot of people score a lot of points right now. For Carson Wentz, how about this though? Carson Wentz is currently quarterback 4 overall in fantasy football. Carson Wentz averaging over 25 fantasy points per game, 7 passing touchdowns in just 2 games played, and he's in full gunslinger mode right now. Washington throwing the ball over 43 times a game, now going up against the Philadelphia defense, who did look better in week 2. They're only allowing 14.2 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. The offensive line, a little bit banged up here for Carson Wentz with Wes Schweitzer and Chase Roulier. Can people get some easier damn name? What happened to John Smith around here? I'm having to... There's like vowels and Z's. I don't know what the hell's going on with some of these names here lately, but don't forget, this is a revenge start for Carson Wentz going up against his former team in Washington, a home game for Carson Wentz. You know he wants to put it on the Eagles, and now he's got the weapons to do it with Jahan Dotson, Terry McLaurin, Logan Thomas, Antonio Gibson. Once again, I like Carson Wentz here this week. What about Jacksonville and the Los Angeles Chargers? For Trevor Lawrence, don't look now, but he's quarterback 14 overall in fantasy football. I just wish we could see the return of some of that rushing upside that we had seen last year. He's got 3 touchdowns through 2 games, but he's just not running the ball a whole lot, which is kind of like that bonus safety. If we had that 3-point cushion every week for that rushing upside, maybe all of a sudden we start starting? Should I keep... Maybe we start starting Trevor Lawrence even more. The Jags throw the ball, though, right around 36.5 times per game. No easy task this week, though, for them going up against the defense of the Los Angeles Chargers. The Jags really aren't the Chiefs' offense. I hate to break it to you. The Chiefs' offense didn't really struggle against this defense, but this is still the Jags, and even though they're improved, so they still need to respect this Chargers defense, who has a lot of playmakers on it, but the Jags may be one of the healthiest teams in all of the NFL. There's like no injuries in Jacksonville. They found that fountain of youth, that secret water, whatever it is. Everybody's healthy in Jacksonville, but it's really hard to throw a quarterback into your fantasy lineup that hasn't proven that he can score multiple touchdowns consistently. There are just so many good quarterback options that Trevor Lawrence may be close, but in a tough matchup like this, he's going to find himself in the sit column. For Justin Herbert, he's not a smash start, which may sound crazy, but it's not so much because of the offense or because, Justin Herbert isn't good. We got to pay attention to this injury here a little bit because he's currently quarterback 7 overall, has 6 passing touchdowns in 2 games. But we know they want to throw the ball a lot, 41 pass attempts a game, which is 6th most in the NFL. The Jags are allowing over 17 fantasy points per game, which is somewhat middle of the pack. But it is this rib cartilage injury that we're worried about for Justin Herbert. It is something you need to pay attention to later on in the week as we get the updates from practice reports and from the doc here. We're going to see what we need to, expect from Justin Herbert. We also have Keenan Allen. Is he still going to be out? We have 2 members of the offensive line. They could be missing time. Corey Linsley and Trey Pipkins. They may not be out there. There's a lot of injuries, a lot of concerning injuries right now in LA that we just need to pay attention to. They need to be watched very, very closely. This could really change the way that Justin Herbert plays if he does play. They could utilize the running game a lot more. Less deep shots down the field. Less time with him in the pocket where he's more vulnerable to take that big hit on the sack and hurt his ribs any further. Just something to pay attention to. If Justin Herbert is active and healthy, of course you start him. This is just one of those ones where we have a little bit of concern with it. How about the Los Angeles Rams and Arizona Cardinals? You got Matthew Stafford, currently sitting at quarterback 17, had 3 touchdowns in week 2, but could have easily had 4 or 5 if it wasn't for penalties. The issue, interceptions. Matthew, you got 5 interceptions in 2 games, which is not ideal for fantasy football. It's still a clear pass-first offense in LA, though they're averaging over 38 pass attempts per game. Now a matchup going up against the Arizona Cardinals, who allow the 2nd most fantasy points to quarterbacks in all of fantasy football, sitting right around 26.9 points per game. No major injury concerns. His elbow seems to be okay there. Now, A-Rob started to get involved in week 2, and he's going to be the X factor going forward. He could have easily had 3 touchdowns last week. He didn't, but if this team continues to look for A-Rob when Kupp is double teamed, this team could get so dangerous, and it's what we've talked about for a long time. They're really starting to acclimate Allen Robinson into this offense more and more each week. That's a good thing for Cooper Kupp. It's a good thing for Allen Robinson, and when it's good for them, it's good for Matthew Stafford as well. Kyler Murray currently sitting at quarterback 8 overall, but he's not using his legs as much as we really want him to, right? One of the biggest upsides to Kyler Murray is that rushing ability, and we really haven't seen him have to use it. Sure, we saw him use it last week where he ran like 80 yards to gain like 2 yards, but we're not seeing him in the box score-wise put up bigger rushing numbers. He still has 4 total touchdowns in 2 games. Arizona is still pass happy right now, averaging over 43.5 pass attempts per game. The Rams, way easier to throw on than they are to run on. They average over 24.5 points to opposing quarterbacks. The concern here, James Conner, Rondale Moore. Does James Conner miss some time? If he does, do we see Kyler run some more? Or do we just see more Eno Benjamin, more Darrell Williams? That's something to pay attention to. But in the 6 games against the Rams that Kyler Murray has played, he's averaged 233 yards through the air and 1 touchdown. Not bad, just not a huge ceiling for Kyler Murray. Maybe not a top 5 finish, but should still sit somewhere in that top 12 range by the end of the week. Which will take us up to Seattle now for the Battle of the Birds, the Falcons, and the Seahawks. For Marcus Mariota, he's currently sitting at quarterback 13 overall. 3 total touchdowns in 2 games played, but he's not even using Kyle Pitts right now, and he's really not rushing the ball consistently either. Atlanta, averaging only 29.5 pass attempts per game, is 25th in the NFL. Going up against Seattle's pass defense, kind of a mid-pass D, if you will, 18.5 points allowed to opposing quarterbacks. No major injuries here, though, just not enough touchdown upside, not enough usage of their big playmakers down the field. Can we get some Kyle Pitts, please? I may start a petition that we don't start Marcus Mariota until Kyle Pitts is involved. If you're with me, hit the like button because we need some more Kyle Pitts. For Geno Smith, well, Geno Mania, I guess, kind of cooled off after week 1, right? I mean, it was going through the roof after 1 week, and then after week 2, everybody's kind of forgotten about Geno Smith already. Currently quarterback 24 overall, 2 touchdowns combined in his 2 games played. None in week 2, though. Now, I don't know about you, but when I see a quarterback that scores 0 touchdowns in a game in which his ceiling is already low and expectations are very low, that doesn't make me want to start this guy. Averaging only 29.5 pass attempts per game, going up against Atlanta, who allows just about 21 fantasy points per game, so it's not a bad matchup, 10th most in the NFL. Once again, though, he just doesn't score enough touchdowns. He doesn't push the ball down the field enough to really boost his passing numbers, where he's fantasy viable for me here. How about Green Bay and Tampa Bay, a battle in the Bay, no matter which Bay you live by, or something like that. You got Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady, and on paper, this should be This should be my Manscaped matchup, but it's not, and I'll tell you exactly why. For Aaron Rodgers, he's currently quarterback 29 in fantasy football. That's just crazy. Aaron Rodgers only has 2 touchdowns through 2 weeks and hasn't even thrown for 250 yards passing yet this season. He's not even throwing the ball that much, right? 32 pass attempts per game. That's 21st overall in the NFL. Now he gets the Tampa Bay defense, which is number 2 in the NFL against opposing quarterbacks, allowing only 9.3 fantasy points per game. I'm going over to Prize Picks right now, and I'm going to smash the under on Aaron Rodgers, which is currently set at 245.5 passing yards. He's not even throwing the ball that much, and against a tough matchup, I'm taking the under on Aaron Rodgers. For the offensive line, what about David Bakhtiari? When are we going to get him back? Aaron Rodgers needs more help. He needs more time in the pocket. But for right now, this is a run-heavy team with limited pass-catching weapons. In a very tough matchup, for now, I have Aaron Rodgers as a sit. I just don't like it on paper here this week. And I can pretty much say the same thing about Tom Brady. Now, if you thought that Aaron Rodgers at quarterback 29 was crazy, how about hearing that Tom Brady is quarterback 30? Another guy, 2 touchdowns through 2 games, barely cracking 200 yards passing each week, not throwing the ball very much, 30.5 pass attempts per game. That's 10 lower than they were at in 2021. Now they have a solid secondary matchup going up against Green Bay, who's only allowing 14.4 fantasy points per game. Another guy, I'm heading over to Prize Picks. I'm going to smash the under on Tom Brady, which is currently set at 260.5 yards. Now, we know that there's going to be hardly anybody to catch the football there this week. Mike Evans officially out. We got Chris Godwin. We got Julio Jones questionable. Gio Bernard is out. They've signed Cole Beasley to their practice squad. They got Russell Gage, but that's about it in a difficult matchup. I never thought I would see a game where Aaron Rodgers faced Tom Brady and neither one of them had very many weapons to do much of anything with. This has got to be one of the craziest matchups between these two. Two of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. And I'm smashing their unders when they face each other on Prize Pick. That is totally crazy. I got Tom Brady as a sit this week as well, which may be a surprise to some people, I guess. I don't know. San Francisco and Denver is up next for Jimmy G and Russell Wilson. First for Jimmy G, now back in San Francisco. He came in and did pretty well last week. 154 yards passing, 1 touchdown, and a rushing touchdown on the ground as well. San Francisco, we know, doesn't throw the ball a ton. Only 26 times per game, 31st overall in the NFL. Denver is a pretty difficult matchup, though. They're only allowing 12.7 fantasy points per game, 5th fewest in the NFL. Does George Kittle return this week? There's a question mark. We've seen what this offense looks like a lot with Jimmy G under center. He may help them win ball games. He may help them compete in the division. But when it comes to fantasy football, too hit or miss, too dependent on the running game, not a high enough ceiling. He's going to be a sit. For Russell Wilson, another one of these studs that I don't know if we can trust him this week. He's currently quarterback 20 overall, has no rushing upside, only 2 touchdowns in 2 games played, didn't even complete 50% of his passes in week 2. They're only throwing the ball 36 times per game, going up against the San Francisco 49ers, who only allow 10.9 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. We don't know the status for sure yet of Jerry Jeudy. Do we get KJ Hamler back? We have multiple offensive linemen that are injured. In my opinion, we got to have Jerry Jeudy. If Jerry Jeudy is not here in this lineup, then I don't think I can start Russell Wilson. This offense is much better with Jerry Jeudy in the ballgame because it gives defenses more to think about. And also this, they need to include their running backs in the pass-catching game more than they did in week 2. Both Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams, very capable pass catchers that can make things happen. Is it vertical and deep down the field? No. It may not be sexy, but it gives the defenses something else to worry about, and it'll try to help open up this offense, because it's apparent that Nathaniel Hackett has no idea what the hell he's doing, and he's not giving Russell Wilson the freedom to make it up on his own. There's some issues in Denver. This is like, I'm getting some weird Matt Nagy type vibes here in Denver, and I don't want to write off Nathaniel Hackett too early, but they got to get their crap together in Denver. This team has way too much talent to be performing like they've been performing, but for right now, I got Russell Wilson as a sit as well. Dallas and New York here, Monday Night Football, Cooper Rush and Daniel Jones. Man, we kind of got screwed with our primetime matchups this week, huh? I mean, you see on paper, Cowboys and Giants, and then you got Cooper Rush and Daniel Jones, and you're like, whatever. At least Cooper Rush led the Cowboys to a win over the Bengals in week 2, 235 yards passing and a touchdown. Threw the ball 31 times last week. Now going up against the Giants, they allow only 16 fantasy points per game. Do we get Michael Gallup back? It says that he's going to get a full slate of work in practice this week. What about Dalton Schultz? We still have multiple injuries on the offensive line. It is a tough time for injuries if you're a Dallas Cowboys fan for sure. Cooper Rush is not a bad quarterback, if I'm being completely honest. He could definitely lead this team to victory once again this week. But when it comes to fantasy football, he just doesn't have that ceiling that we're looking for, and he's going to be a sit. And then lastly, we'll end it with Daniel Jones here, currently quarterback 19 overall, yet to throw for 200 yards in a game, has just as many turnovers as he has touchdowns, and sometimes looks absolutely lost on the field. They're only throwing the ball 27.5 times per game. Solid defense in Dallas. I mean, they have really been playing great here the first 2 weeks of the season, allowing only 14 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. Does Wan'Dale Robinson return this week for the Giants? He's one player we're really paying attention to. But this is too up and down for me. Daniel Jones goes out every week and basically scores you 25 points or 5 points and really nothing in between, and it's just too big of a risk in week 3 of fantasy football, so he's going to remain a sit for me here this week as well. But there you have it. My quarterback starts and sits for week 3 fantasy football. If you enjoyed the content, if you learned anything today, do me a favor, hit that like button down below and consider subscribing if you haven't already. We'll have you covered all year long for fantasy football, giving you all the information you need to make the best decisions for your team. But for now, I'm going to get out of here. Hopefully you guys have a great rest of your day. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you later.